Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 6th through 8th grade course professional learning community on the Georgia Department of Education platform. This platform was created for educators to collect, collaborate, and support one another. Be sure to set up your notifications to your liking and do check back to engage in discussion as often as you wish. Please share this platform with your colleagues so we continue to grow and share beneficial information specific to middle and high school choral education. The more colleagues active yields more opportunity for us to share and grow from one another. My name is Brandy Dent, and I will be your virtual PLC lead in middle and high school chorus. Today's topic will be all about assessments. One of the first things that we should know about assessments is, of course, its definition. The word assess comes from the Latin verb essere, meaning to sit with. Now, this definition applies that one is supposed to sit with the learner. Therefore, it's something that we do with and for our students and not to our students. Whenever we're assessing, we want to keep in mind these things in this picture. We're trying to evaluate. There must be a plan. We want to measure. We may have a goal in mind of what those children need to know and respond to. We need to have an analysis of what we need to teach and for them to learn. And of course, we want to make sure we get great results in those evaluations. So keep in mind that when you assess your child, although you're not sitting with them, but you are there step by step guiding them in the knowledge that you're trying to transfer to them. So always keep in mind that the root word of assessment is essedere, meaning to sit with. Stay with your children as they're learning. Of course, one of the reasons that we assess is totally in our professional standards, meaning assessment strategies. Verbatim, the teacher systematically chooses a variety of diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment strategies and instruments that are valid and appropriate for the content and student population. And then we also have another standard, which is 6, assessment uses. The teacher systematically gathers, analyzes, and uses relevant data to measure student progress, to inform instructional content and delivery methods, and to provide timely and constructive feedback to both students and parents. All in all, as a professional educator, it is our job to not only teach students, but to make sure that we're always assessing and giving feedback so that parents and students are aware of where they are in the learning process. Never forget to include your parents in your child's learning progress as well. Now let's look at formative assessments. Some of the key elements in formative assessments are as follows: the identification by teachers and learners of learning goals, intentions or outcomes, and criteria for achieving these. There are rich conversations between students and teachers that continually build and go deeper. The provision of effective, timely feedback to enable students to advance their learning. The active involvement of students in their own learning. And teachers responding to identified learning needs and strengths by modifying their teaching approaches. If you look at this chart here, the teacher needs to know where the learner is going, where the learner is, and how they're going to get them there. And the same thing counts for the peers and the learners. So where the learner is going, you want to clarify, share, and understand the learning intentions. Give them the goals. Let them know what you expect them to know so that they can know how to take those notes. They can know how to pay attention appropriately. Some of the information we provide them isn't the basic knowledge. We give them a little bit more, but give them an idea of what that basic knowledge should be. Of course, where the learner is. Engineering effective discussions, tasks, and activities that elicit evidence of learning. That's the teacher's job. Now, as far as activating students as learning resources for one another, That's the peer's job. And activating students as owners of their own learning, that's the learner's job. And of course, how are you going to get there? Provide feedback to the students constantly through assessments. And that way you can move them forward so that they can get those new tasks, so that they can get enriched even. So always push your learners forward. Don't just say, okay, we're done with this chapter. Let's take a break. Of course, you want to take a break or two, but you want to make sure that you're driving them forward to learning even more material. And that's formative assessments. Now, today, in my process of sharing different examples, these are the performing assessments that I'm going to look at. Right from the Georgia Department of Education website are our performance assessments. We're looking at the performing side, where a student is to analyze, interpret, and select musical works for presentation. In that, they're utilizing a rhythmic and melodic system to read and sing music appropriate to ability, identify basic music vocabulary and symbols representing tempo, meter, dynamics, articulation, and phrasing, notate simple rhythms and melodies from oral examples utilizing a dictation method, and read and notate music using available technology. Now, before you jump the gun, please understand that every day you may use some of your performance standards or you may not. You never want to make this huge unit that's overwhelming for you to teach and for your kids to learn. Break each standard down and apply those vocabulary words and those concepts that will benefit them during a certain unit. And then you can move on to the extra stuff. So, what I've done is giving you some formative examples of how I've broken those standards down for myself. Because when dealing with formative assessments, practice always makes perfect. One of the things that I do to make sure that my kids are practicing the concepts, bell ringers right when they walk in, or tickets out the door, a task that they must complete before they leave. One of those tasks, work with a friend and write the following notes on the treble staff: F sharp, A flat, C natural, E sharp. It's reminding them of their old knowledge of learning note names, face in the space, but it's also including the new concept of the accidentals, the sharps, the naturals, and the flats. Number 2 says work with a friend to review the chromatic scale ascending and write out the syllables on your bell ringer sheet. So the students are literally going to write out the chromatic scale going up. Notice that they're working with a friend so that they can work with each other to talk it out. Maybe one won't understand, maybe one will. Maybe they both will be on the same page, but because they're discussing it, it's going to stick better. Work with a friend and write the following notes on the bass staff. Line notes: G flat, B sharp, yeah, that's a tough one, D natural, F flat, and A sharp. Of course, these students, because we probably haven't reviewed enharmonics yet, we would expect them to put those notes on the lines. And you'll show those students and review with those students, once again, the line note names of the bass staff. Number 4, what are the rules for finding one in a key signature? By now, you've gone over the accidentals, and now you've went over the purpose of them in a key signature, and you've shown students the concept of finding one. So assessing your students allows you to build more knowledge on top of the next. And this might be 2 weeks time frame, or it could be a week. It depends on your learners. And number 5 says, copy this and place a whole note on the line or space where one would be. So now the students can articulate the rules for finding one, and now it's their turn to actually show you that they know where one is. These are different ways of practice for students with accidentals, those music symbols that they may not be familiar with. Now, of course, this in itself is something that I would have my students practice singing, both ascending and descending. I'll be showing you the concepts of teaching this in a little bit in this video. But again, always find different ways to practice and go through the motions with your students. The next is going to be a worksheet. Notice that this is a simple music theory worksheet where the students are adding the given accidentals to the notes. And remember, it even gives them the rule that the accidentals are always to the left of the note. So they're practicing. They're seeing G sharp, but they're reminded that the accidental should be written to the left. That's practice of seeing accidentals, writing accidentals, even identifying accidentals, which brings me to the next worksheet. Have them name those accidentals. They're getting a review on treble staff notes, bass staff notes, and they also are being introduced once again to knowing what those accidentals are there for and where they're located and how to name them. Writing notes with accidentals would be the next sheet that I would roll out. It says, write the given notes with accidentals below. Remember, the accidentals are always written to the left of the note. I love reinforcement worksheets, not busy work, but things that reinforce what we've taught and giving them a little bit more level of difficulty every time. So the students would write their own notes. They're learning how to properly write notes on the staff, on the lines and the spaces and so forth. And then that brings to one of the more difficult worksheets. When you've talked about major scale or minor scale and now key signatures, where the students are basically to look at the key signature and tell you what key it's in. I even take it one step further and ask for them to write in the scales and put their solfege or sight reading numbers underneath the notes just to give them practice. Some students will master this concept, some won't. But you want to make sure that you're continuously assessing, continuously teaching, continuously building on levels of knowledge, because some of these students will turn into music majors in college, and this will be beneficial for them. So make sure that you're teaching that music literacy, but you're taking it step by step. Never want to introduce key signatures without going over accidentals. Now, a summative assessment. Let's just look at the comparison. A formative assessment helps students learn to practice. Summative assessment assesses students' performance. Formative is throughout the course. Summative is at the end of the instructional period. Why use formative? To identify gaps and improve learning. Why summative? To collect evidence of student knowledge, skill, and proficiency. How do you formative assess? Via approaches that support specific student needs. Just depends on what grade, depends on what type of class you have, depends on the student's abilities. How do you assess summatively? Via exit learning products or a curriculum assessment, end of the unit test, end of the year, end of the course test. Those are summative assessments. So assessment of learning, generally taken by students at the end of a unit or semester to demonstrate the sum of what they have or have not learned. Summative assessment methods are the most traditional way of evaluating student work. And a good summative assessment, tests and other grade evaluations must be reliable, valid, and free of bias. And we should want to change our assessments up every year. You might use the same format, you might use some of the same questions, but if you find that my students didn't do really well on this question, maybe I need to reword it. So teachers should always assess their assessments to make sure that they are appropriate for their students. Now let's look at some examples of summative assessments. Keep in mind that I'm still looking at those performance standards that I mentioned earlier. One way is to literally give students vocabulary. Make sure that they understand what each symbol means. Fill in the blank, multiple choice, matching, short answer, whatever you've allowed your students time to be able to bring into them. Meaning that, have they discussed the definition of a flat, a sharp, or a natural? Have they written the definition themselves? Because if we've never taught them the definition, or we've never given them the opportunity to practice the definition, because let's be honest, they probably won't go home and study as much for our courses. But if we haven't helped them learn, we can't expect them to do well on the assessment. Yes, our smart learners are going to always achieve. They're going to go home and study. Their parents are going to assist them. But what about the other few that don't have time to study at home? How have we helped those learners in class to bring this information in? That's what your quiz should include. Sight singing test. Of course, this particular one has 5 flats in the key signature. Would your students know their starting pitch? Would they know how to find the starting pitch? Would they be aware that it's do or 1 versus it being 2 because or re because they're used to the key of C? Make sure that they understand that. And when they do, that's your time to test them. I have an example of a student singing this example. So we want to make sure that we've given our kids foundation and practice time with each other, by themselves, with us, before we start assessing them. And of course, you can assess rhythm fluency as well. This can be one of 2 ways or many ways. You can clap out the rhythm or have this rhythm pre-recorded, and then you can have your students circle the one that you actually did. Or you can have your students stand and perform these rhythms. Whatever your method is, just make sure that it's something that you've allowed your students to practice in class. Now, as far as data, I always want to make sure that my students know their learning targets, but they have a pacing guide so that they know where they are and what's expected of them, either it be for a unit or for the entire school year. Make sure that you set goals for your students. I want you to be able to sing a chromatic scale by the end of next week. Make sure you're practicing and have something physical for them to know that a chromatic scale test or assessment is coming. Make sure that you give them those learning goals, and make sure that you give them those learning targets, which is progression of small steps that are mastered one at a time. A chromatic scale could be broken down into many moments. I only want you to sing it ascending this week. Next week, we'll focus on descending. I only want you to sing it on solfege this week. Next week, we'll sing it on numbers. Always just have different steps. Make them have a reason to feel like they're achieving something. Give them little stair steps so that they feel like they're learning little by little. And of course, use a sequential assessment program that allows students to test at their own pace and master each learning target before moving on. My students do choir karate. This particular platform gives me a nice little chart for my students where I put their names and they know everything that is expected of them in many sections, starting from returning their choir forms all the way to being able to do 16th notes in 6/8 rhythm. Everything that I'm expecting them. So even when I get new students, It's the same checklist. Every student is expected to practice and learn this. And I bet you're wondering, well, how do you set up or how do you catch up a new student to students that exist? Well, you group your students. You use a form of differentiated instruction. A differentiated classroom provides varied avenues to acquire content, process information, and develop final products. By giving students an appropriate challenge that meets their needs, student growth and success is maximized. Have centers where you're able to work with those students while other students are able to move on. You might have a rhythm error detection game on the computer one day, note name practice on the computer another, or if you have many computers, do them both. Grand staff game. All of these things will allow students time to practice while you're doing something else. Of course, I had recorders here for teachers that still use those in middle school or high school. Or you could replace that with keyboards or guitars, reviewing a song, going over a new song, compositions. That way students can create their own music. And of course, have a teacher directed center where you're going over rhythms with that new student. You're going over solfege with that new student. Or you have a student that's mirroring you who maybe one day will be your music major student, and they're helping that student with their solfege or rhythm. There are ways to do this. And we're talking about part of your day. We know that you want to get ready for large group performance evaluation. We know that you want to get ready for that spring concert. But what about music literacy? Give yourself time, no more than 15, 20 minutes out of your classroom time, if that long, so that you can have time to incorporate the concepts and elements of music so that your students can learn and practice and understand. Learning centers with differentiated content will be as follows. First station, group 1, beginning rhythms. The second group, rhythm computer game. The third group, recorders or piano. The fourth group, which is your advanced students, grand staff computer games. So you can even divide your kids out from beginning learners to intermediate learners to advanced learners in one class setting. We just have to make sure that we plan appropriately. That's the hardest thing to do, is to plan and get this type of stuff ready. But if you have your station set up at the beginning of the year, I guarantee you your students will understand and know how to navigate through them all year. It's just something that you have to think about and really try to incorporate in your everyday teaching. One thing that I've learned with teaching chromatic scales and even scales, sometimes I have students that need that extra help. I use a keyboard with one student who's fluent and advanced, and I have the other student singing who's comfortable singing, and I also have a student that may not understand pitch, and they're using what we call a tubaloo. You can make these out of PVC pipes or you can buy them. That student is listening to themselves. One student is reviewing the scales, and of course I use numbers and solfege. And of course, this has the chromatic names on the side. And one student is using a keyboard. And I have these little roll-out keyboards in class. I've labeled the notes. I've taught the students how to play their major, minor, and chromatic scale in the key of C, in the key of D, maybe in the key of F, depending on the pitch. But put them in a station together to help each other. They're forming a community of learners, just like we are. And this is the keyboard. And of course, one student is practicing the scales on solfege and numbers. That's an easy station. And every group could do it if you have more keyboards. So be creative with your differentiation instruction. During rehearsals, these are some other techniques. Let's say you want to work on your students seeing the music appropriately. How often do we have students, I don't know exactly where we are, I get lost. These are ways to differentiate, ways to fix seeing. Enlarge the music on a projector, on a copier. Your students might have the music physically, but if you have a projector in your room, put it on the screen and physically show them where to go. Have them highlight their parts in their music. Photocopying, of course, is not great, but make them one sheet for practice. And that way you can make sure they understand where their part is, especially if you're doing 2 or 3 or 4 part harmony and you have a new learner, help them understand how to find their part. Separate the words from the music. We can move the words out of the way and make sure that students understand where their notes are. A lot of times they're ready to sing the words, but they don't know what they're doing yet. So have the words when you make the copies, 1 or 2 copies for them, tape over the words or cover up the words and just give them the music. Use visual cueing throughout the rehearsal. Either it be you've put in letter A, B, C, D, E, and F in your music. You've had the kids number certain measures. Help them understand how and what to listen for with your cueing or your visual cueing. Demonstrate visual modeling or desired outcome. If you want your students to keep the beat by tapping their legs, you do it. Demonstrate anything that you want your kids to do by you doing it, by other peers showing them how to do it. This is a little out there, but it helps. If you have a strobe light and you can connect it to your sound system to flash a steady beat, and you have students that can handle that visually, go for it. Use a marker to draw pictorial representations of phrasing. Make sure your kids are coloring. I know it's crazy to just use a pencil, but have them use a marker too if you need to. If your music is reusable, or even if you just bought this music, whatever gets them visual representation of what you're saying, let them do it. And use a color coding system for solfege numbers. If you want your kids to only color all of their doors yellow or red, let them do it. Help them understand music. The more you give them, the better they'll be at learning. And this is strategies for hearing. Place weak singers next to strong singers. And of course, use this so they can hear themselves. Provide audio practice files. If you can have your students work independently without you, maybe a group sectional work together to learn their music, or one of your star students help that dependent student, let them make audio files for them. Let them take a moment out of class for 10 minutes or so they can help them. Utilize vocal warm-ups aimed at the changing voice and understanding the difference in vocal registers. How often do we want to fix our students from sliding from high to low, or wanting to fix our students singing the raised 5 in a minor scale? Help them with your warm-ups. Develop warm-ups or use warm-ups that are already out there that will assist them with that. Sing and play examples for students to echo. Have them sing back everything that you've just sang if it helps them. Rote gets in the brain. Sometimes it takes a little while, but it will. And give them a visual of what you're singing. That helps too. Create or use Tube Blues to allow students to listen to themselves sing. We went over that one. Provide an alternate, simple descant line. Sing and play only certain sections of the song, or simply modify words and pitches. If you use these wonderful things, and I'm also going to link these good reads into the post, just make sure you're doing all you can, as always, to check with the students to ensure that they're learning what you intended for them to learn. I cannot stress that enough. Plan, be intentional, and make sure that your students know exactly what you want them to learn, and you've articulated to them exactly what you want them to learn, and you assess them on it. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please remember to invite colleagues, and please remember to check back as often as you can. Have a wonderful day, and thank you.